Today, I'll be discussing social network analysis. And in today's world, it is the network among people, largely through technology, largely through the social media, that matters more. And as media and communication researchers, it is important for us to have an understanding of what these networks are. How do we describe networks? How do we analyze networks? How do we look into connections inside those networks? And what are the measurements we can do about those networks? So let's have a detailed discussion on these topics in today's presentation. So network analysts see the world as a collection of interconnected pieces. It's not the pieces alone that matter, but the interconnection between them or the associations between them that are important. So the network analysis provides ways to summarize networks and also to identify key people or the objects that occupy strategic locations and positions within a matrix of links. So we are trying to find out who are these key people and what are the locations they occupy in the network, and how strong are those links between those people, and whether they are central to a network or whether they are a bridge between the network. So we try and analyze these things in a network analysis. And a lot of these network terms we have been using for a long time without knowing that these are network analysis terms. So terms like word of mouth, where we discuss how certain things or certain ideas or certain concepts, they just pass on from one place to another through word of mouth. So that basically is also an idea of a network. Or when we talk of a friend of friends, especially on social media also these days, but otherwise too we have these discussions about somebody who's a friend of a friend of a friend. So when we talk on those terms, then also we are talking about some kind of a network lingo, if I can use that term. And of course this particular book called The 6 Degrees of Separation, and which was so influential, is also basically a network term which suggests that everybody on this planet is connected to another person by a maximum of 6 degrees of separation. For example, if we have to find out an association between me and the American president, for example, then I would need just 6 different people to connect to the president. So in that way, everybody on this planet of so many billions of people are connected to each other by a maximum of 6 degrees of freedom. Or even when we use the term popular, we use that in terms of the network and the connections that these people have. Or when we use the term less popular, even then the idea is about the person who may not have very strong networks but who is still very influential, and we will find out the exact measures of these kind of networks. And also we've heard about terms like bridge between the people. So all these things are related to the network analysis as we know of today. And it's important to discuss a very interesting snippet here, and this is from recent research. It says that the majority of people on Facebook have averages between 2.9 and 4.2 degrees of separation. So almost 3 billion active Facebook users, and the degree of separation is a maximum 4.2. So if there is any person on Facebook, there are only 4 friends between you and that person to the maximum. So we are that much connected on the social media, or this is the strength of the network that we are living in at the moment. So these network connections have always been there. These ties and connections between people, they have always been there. These relationships, these cliques, these clusters, groups, teams, partnerships, clans, tribes, coalitions, companies, institutions, they've always been there. But because of this new network concepts that have entered, And because much of it is very visible, especially because of the social media, that all these terms have become even more apparent or even more popular than they were. And this is largely because of the tools that are possible, that the tools that exist now. Earlier, network data was very difficult to create, for example, and then also to collect, and then to analyze the network and to visualize it in a manner in which it makes sense to the simple reader was very difficult. It demanded significant technical mastery, and often it required lots and lots of computer coding, for example. But these days there are very simple tools like Node Excel, for example, where you just at a click of a button you can not only access network, but you can analyze them, you can find out the measurements of various kinds. We'll discuss what these measurements are, and also to visualize those networks. So these networks are much more easy not only to access but also to analyze and visualize because of the tools that are available to us. So let's talk about some of the important elements in a network. The primary building block are the vertices. So it could be one person, it could be one group, it could be certain team or an organization or a country or an institution or any other entity. It could be even a web page, or it could be keywords or videos, but they are at the center of the network. They are the building blocks on which the networks are formed. So when we talk of network of people, the individual person would be a vertex there, or would be a vertex there. So when we are talking of vertices, we are talking of these kind of things. Or when we talk of associations between colleges and universities, for example, then those colleges and universities would be the vertices. So they are the primary building blocks of social media platforms. And as important as vertices are edges, and edges are the links or the ties or the connections or even relationships between two vertices. So whether they are linked to whether two vertices or whether two people are linked to each other, and how strong are those connections, and some other things about those connections as well. So when we talk of edges, we are talking of things like proximity, we are talking of things like collaboration, we are talking of things like kinship or friendship, or even trade partnerships. It could also be about literature citations, how people cite each other, for example. About investments, whether there is investment between these two entities among each other. It could be hyperlinks, it could be transaction, or even any other shared attribute about people who would have attended the same school or the same college, for example. So edges are a very important component of a network. They tell us about the ties or the links and how strong those ties and links are. So we will be talking about these six different types of networks, or these six different types of connections, and I will be discussing each one of them in the next six slides. So we could have polarized networks, where we see people are divided. We could have a unified network. We could have fragmented networks. We could have clustered networks. We could have in hub and spoke. So it's like people are reaching out to the same person, or it could be an out, hub, and spoke. So these are the six basic types of networks. So whenever we see a network, we can just by looking at the visualization suggest what kind of a network that is. Now let's see the characteristics of these types of networks. So generally, and we've seen that on Twitter also in a big way, if the subject is political, then it is very common to see two separate polarized crowds take shape. And that is because participants in one group mostly do not interact with people in the other group. So this is a divided group. And each group could be centering around influential tweeters of the two parties, for example. So this is an example of polarized crowds on Twitter. We could also see a lot of tight crowds, especially when it is about some academic community, say for example, media and communication researchers about social network analysis. So, or it could be about a crowd in a conference, for example, or subjects that attract like-minded people. So that is a kind of a tight crowd that we talk of. So there could be different clusters, but people are tied to each other, and they are even tied to the other groups. So when we talk of a conference crowd, for example, there could be different sections, but there are connections between all the other sections also. So that is an idea of a tight group, as different from a polarized group we just saw. We could also be having clusters. So when well-known products or services are discussed in Twitter, there might be many comments from participants who have no connection to each other. So if it is about a fan page of Cristiano Ronaldo, for example, so a lot of people who like Cristiano Ronaldo would be discussing that without knowing each other. And there could be another crowd around Messi, for example, or around Sachin Tendulkar or Virat Kohli or even Babar Azam, for example. So we have these brand clusters where these fragmented Twitter populations are clustered around one of those well-known celebrities or even products or services. So that is an idea of a brand cluster. So we have community clusters around certain popular topics. And on those particular popular topics, we might have multiple smaller groups. And those groups may be formed around a few influencers or a few topics of interest. The topic remains the same, and on a certain of those subtopics, there are multiple smaller groups. So they are known as community clusters. And scholars have described them as bazaars, which host multiple centers of activities. And global news stories attract these kind of community clusters, because each country or each outlet would be having its own kind of a following. So it's the same topic, but on the same topic there are different views about it, or it could also be about different interests or around different influencers, that these kind of clusters are formed. So that is another kind of a network that forms. And then we have this broadcast network whenever there is a breaking news, and it's just one organization or one entity which has the news, and many people just repeat what some prominent news or media organizations have tweeted. So it's like a broadcast network. The members are connected only to the hub without connecting to each other. Everybody is connected to the hub, but they are not connected to each other. So this is a broadcast network, one single source connected to a lot of other organizations or news institutions. Or we could be having a support network where a lot of people, they come down to one entity. So for example, if there is a customer complaint, then they would be all going down to that contact us account. So it is like a hub and spoke structure, but at the other of another direction, where many people from outside, they come to the same person, or there are lots and lots of tweets directed at the same entity. So unlike the broadcast network where people were just copying it and it was going out, so here it is all coming in. So that again is a hub and spoke structure. So just to provide you a glimpse of the same thing that we have discussed so far, so we could be having a divided or a polarized crowd, and this is taken from the NodeXL website. Or we could be having a unified crowd, so these are all real tweets and real people. We could be having these fragmented clusters, so all these dots are the fragments that we can see. Or it could be clustered around on a single topic, but many groups there. Or we could be having a broadcast network where it is going out, or a support network where all the tweets are coming into the same point or to the same source. So we can see this visualization in real tweets as well. Now we will be talking about the different network metrics or the different measurements that can be done regarding these vertices and edges. So let's start off with the density. So the density is a count of the number of relationships observed to be present in a network. So when we have a network, we first of all observe the total number of relationships, and then we divide it by the total number of possible relationships that could be present. So if it is a dense relationship, then there are lots and lots of interrelation relationships between all the vertices in the network. So this is one quantitative way, or because it provides us with a number. So it is one quantitative way to capture important sociological ideas like cohesion. So if the density is strong, means there's strong cohesion within the group, or solidarity, or even membership, or even things like fragmentation. So density is a very important measure of the social network analysis. So a centralized network is one in which the network is centered on just one or few important nodes. So just one or two important vertices, and everybody is connected to those few important people. So centralization is a measure that tells how much the network is centered around just a few people. So if it is a highly centralized network, it is centered around just one or two people. So centralized networks are generally centered around those few important people. And if we have a high level of centralization, then it is basically a hierarchical social network, that there is somebody who's very influential, and then people at various stages are following that influential person. So that's a very important metric about social networks. The other network metric is the homophily. It looks at the similarity of the people who are connected. So we have to find out what are the themes on which these people are connected, or what are the attributes on which these people are connected. So if people of the same income group are connected to each other in the network, we see that there is homophily on the income attribute. Or if there are people of the roughly the same educational level connected to each other, then we say that it is homophilous on the education attribute. It could also be about religious affiliation. It could also be about age, for that matter. So degree centrality, and I have taken this diagram from the internet. So the degree centrality is about who has lots of friends. So if we see this person 3 there, this person 3 is connected to a lot of people. He's connected to 5, he's connected to 2, he's connected to 0, he's connected to 1, he's connected to 4, he's connected to 6. So he or she has a high degree centrality. So degree centrality is actually the number of edges that are directly connected to it. And if there are very few people connected to a person, for example, 7 here is connected to only one person here. So the degree centrality of 7, as we can say, is much lower here. So degree centrality is actually a measure which tells us how many friends that particular node or that particular vertex has. So it is a simple count of the number of connections linked to the network. So if the network is directed inwards, then the number of connections that point to the vertex is the degree centrality. So we have directed networks. At times we do not have directed networks where there is just link between the two vertices. At other times they're directed, where it is either going outside or it is going inside. Especially in terms of social networks, they can be directed, whether you are tweeting whether you are retweeting what they have tweeted, or whether they are tweeting what you have tweeted. So that is where we have this direction. So in degree is the number of connections that point inward at the vertex, and out degree is the number of connections that originate at a vertex and point toward other vertices. So we might be having in degree centrality, and we might be having out degree centrality. And betweenness centrality is a very, very important measure in social network analysis. And as we can see here that this person A is very important for the connection between these two groups. So every connection that has to pass from this group to the other blue group, for example, has to pass through A. So A has a very high betweenness centrality. If anybody has to connect from this blue group to the other group, it has to pass through A. So it is a measure of how important that entity or how important that node is for connection between these groups. So let's see a formal definition of betweenness centrality. So it is a measure of how often a given vertex lies on the shortest path between the two other vertices. So as we saw there, A lies very often between the shortest path between two other vertices. So that is why it is a kind of a bridge score, because if we remove that person, that would disrupt the connections between the other people in the network. And that is why even the idea of brokering is reflected in the measurement of betweenness centrality. So it's very important in keeping the connections intact. So that is why this betweenness centrality in tweet analysis, for example, we find out who are the people who have a high betweenness centrality, and they are extremely important for the ideas to flow, or they're extremely important for that particular network at that particular time. And the other thing is eigenvector centrality, and we'll see that it is a variable score, and it is not just about how many people they are connected to, but how strong are the people or how influential are the people whom you are connected to. So when we hear these things in the common parlance about this person having connections in the right places, we talk about this concept of eigenvector centrality. So it is a variable measure. It is not just a direct measure of how many friends you have or how many people are connected to you, but how influential those friends are, or how influential are those people in your network. So a person with a few connections could have a very high eigenvector centrality if those connections are to very well connected people. So as I said, it allows us to have a variable value, so that connecting to some vertices has more benefits. So if you are connected to somebody, a person on a network who has a high eigenvector centrality, then there is more value for you. So as we suggested, it's not a straightforward measure. It is about how important are the people or how influential are the people that you are connected to. So eigenvector centrality is also a very important measure in social network analysis. The other important thing is clustering coefficient. So as we can see here, the friends of this green dot, they are not connected to each other. This green dot is connected to all these three people, A, B, and C, but they are not connected to each other. So if they are not connected to each other, the clustering coefficient is less. If the other people, they are connected to each other, then the clustering coefficient is high. So this is a very important measure in graph theory, where we find out how connected your friends are to each other. So if your friends are not connected well to each other, then the clustering coefficient is low, but if they are connected highly to each other, the clustering coefficient is high. So if your friends all know each other, you have a high clustering coefficient. If your friends don't know each other, you have a low clustering coefficient. A few thoughts about how to go about with network visualization, and this is from Schneiderman's NetVis Nirvana. So just a few suggestions. First of all, each vertex should be visible. So when we are visualizing the networks, then each of these vertex, or each of the person who are tweeting, or each of those organizations, or even schools or colleges or institutions, they are all visible. Each vertex degree is countable. That means we can count the degrees or the connections they have to each other. Every edge can be followed from source to destination. So when we see these links, we can easily find out where they are traveling from. And also the clusters and the outliers are identifiable. So who are the people who have clustered around, and who are the people who are not inside the cluster but they are outliers. And in social network analysis, these are some of the important questions that we need to ask. So we need to ask what kind of social roles are being performed within a social media collection. So we have seen all those important roles. So how important is the centrality, or how important is the betweenness centrality, and those kind of things. And which are those people who play important roles within that social network. So when we are analyzing tweets, who are the people whose tweets are being copied more, and whether there are subgroups, and if there are subgroups, are they connected to each other. How do new ideas propagate through a network? So whenever there is a new idea, how does it propagate through the network? And how does the overall structure of a social network change after a particular event? If there is a massive event and we are seeing the networks after that event, so how does the structure of the network change? So does it become a broadcast network, or does it become a more cohesive network, or these kind of questions? There are of course many other questions, but I've just touched upon some of the basic ones. Thank you so much for being present today.